Hey, it's Travis. Too many camp directors run just on gut feel. Our free Resilient Camp Blueprint Diagnostic is your dashboard for resilience. Take it today at camp.mba/Travis. Again, that's camp.mba/Travis. How good are you at pushing past the overwhelm of running a summer camp and considering the big picture, the long-term vision of what your camp does?
This is CampHacker. Come find our show notes and our blog for camp directors and leaders at camphacker.tv.
A big thanks to our sponsors who make the CampHacker podcast possible. Imagine camp registration software that actually gives you more time to do what you love. With UltraCamp, you can effortlessly track attendance, manage staff, streamline registration, and more. Explore now at ultracampmanagement.com/camphacker.
Hello, Camp Mavericks, and welcome to the CampHacker podcast brought to you by UltraCamp and the Camp Recruiting and Retention Playbook from Joanna Warren-Smith and me. I'm Travis Allison. I'm a summer camp marketing and communications consultant specializing in getting parents to open, read, and act on your communications.
Hi, folks. My name is Stephane, and I work with Stephane Camp Consulting, and I'm an operational management consultant.
Stephane, it is so great to have you on the show, finally. I've talked about it so many times, but I'm grateful to have you here. We have some really interesting topic that you and I dug into when we spent a couple of days doing some visioning in Montreal, and we're going to get there. But what I want to start with is, how did you first get connected to summer camp?
Sure. Well, Travis, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. I know we've had some mini chats, but it's great to be here with you today. So I kind of found my my space in camping later in life, or maybe not as common as a teenage. So in New Brunswick, kind of the context of camp, I just didn't really knew it existed to this degree. So when I was about grade 12, going into first year university, I found summer camp, and I ended up working at a ECCL summers camp called Camp Rotary back in New Brunswick, which was specialized for kids, adults with physical and intellectual disabilities, as well as we had a oncology camp and a diabetes camp. So that's where my career got started, and then kind of grew from there like anybody else. Camp counselor, program instructor, LIT directors, to finally, at some point in my career, that coveted camp director position that we all kind of think about when we start working in camping.
Yeah, and you took a little detour through a degree in computer science, and then started to come back and focus on camp stuff. Now, you've really focused a lot in your career in camps that serve kids with different kinds of different abilities and different challenges.
So I've had the opportunity. Like I mentioned, starting with Easter Seals, after I became the camp director there, then I was offered an opportunity to work with Diabetes Canada and running their diabetes camp programs across Atlantic Canada, and then eventually the national director position with them. So it gave me opportunities across Canada working in diabetes camping, but I still had some opportunities working with other kind of chronic illness management camps. So I've had the opportunity to work with a camp in northern New Brunswick that specialized in kind of adults and kids with physical and intellectual disabilities. Had a great opportunity also to help start the diabetes camp program in St. Lucia, and as well as start a diabetes family camp with one of my partners in Turkey for a while. So yeah, I've had some unique and great experience working with the special need chronic illness population across Canada and outside of Canada.
Yeah, right on. I also don't want to lose, I really want to make sure that I mention that you have been the president of the Canadian Camps Association. And for those of you from the States are picturing the American Camp Association, it's not like that in Canada. That's not how it runs here. It's not exactly the same thing. But really, the industry owes you so much gratitude for the work that you did during the pandemic, for getting advocacy started and coordinating that with all the different provincial camp associations. And I think that's been a huge contribution to this industry, your connection as the president, and then also connecting with all the other countries through the ISF as well.
I appreciate that. It was certainly you kind of forget about it, but you don't forget about it as you still wear some of those battle scars. But there was a lot of learnings and opportunities through those difficult times. But as a community kind of got brought together, and one of the things that really was interesting and instrumental was how good or in some cases not good we were with the accumulation of data
Sure.
and what
Yeah.
that meant for the industry. I know the American Campus Association have some really tangible data in terms of the sector, but in Canada we had more limitations on those from a national perspective. So we were really pulling in all the provinces, but I think it really spoke to how do we move forward as an industry and a sector to work with provincial, federal, and even international partners and governments to validate the work that we do and how important the work is. I think as camp professionals, we talk about it, we
Yeah.
know about it,
Yeah.
but it's still very insular. So how do we talk about that impact outside of our population or outside of our community? And I think it's important to kind of identify in language that will speak to these individuals. So when we were doing a lot of this work, we were talking obviously, of course, on the direct impact that it has on children. But we also knew that some of the departments in government we were talking with was economic development, was tourism. So we
Yeah.
then start switching the language on how much we impact
Yeah.
jobs in the market in the summer and the seasonal jobs pieces. How much do we impact tourism in these sectors? So it was about telling them the benefit that we certainly have on kids and adolescents and young adults, but then also from a more kind of business-minded approach, what is the impact on the economy? What's the impact on the job market and all these things, so that we're not a single layered organization or
Right.
community with multiple layers with multiple impact, right? So that was certainly a huge takeaway from the entire thing as kind of looking back now through some of the challenge, kind of some of the up points that kind of got developed through that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And certainly that thinking about and noticing that and having you explain some of that stuff to me and others who are volunteering during COVID to lessen the impact on camps, that it inspired other conversations that I've had and in no small way led to me starting our latest podcast called The Pudding, which is me working with Dr. Mandy Baker on how camp research can benefit camps and how we can tell the better to the story of camp, and definitely inspired by the work that was done at that point. So thank you for all of that.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. I want to talk about the topic. Before I do, I'm just going to remind everybody watching on YouTube or listening in their car or walking their dog or doing dishes that reviews are important. They definitely are a thing that help us out. So your app that you're listening to us on may have a way of leaving a review for our show. But we'd also love it just for simplicity's sake, if you go to ratethispodcast.com/camp, there's a ratings and reviews button there that you can leave us a review on. So I appreciate that. We are, as I said at the opening question, we're going to talk about Camp 2035. What sort of mentality or ways of thinking we have to develop as an industry, as camp professionals, to be ready and intentional about getting camps through the next 10 years. And so Stephane and I had a great discussion about it, and I wanted to turn it into a show. We talked both about the skills that a camp professional will need and a skill that the camp organization, whether it's a board or an ownership team, whatever it is, that they're going to have to be ready for. Stephane, if we're thinking about let's look like a board or management team, an ownership group, what sort of things do you think are the most important for them to be mindset wise and just the skills they need to develop to shepherd their camps for the next 10 years?
I think one of the word that comes to mind is flexibility. And I think it's as much almost for the organization as the individual, as well as we go into the next 10 years. It's about how do we become flexible? How do we keep the culture of camping, or the essence of the culture of camping to the degree, but be open-minded, because I think there are significant changes that have occurred and will continue to occur in the next 10 years that can impact us as a sector, either not saying positive or negative, but how do we become proactive versus reactive in this situation? And I think one of the things that we're clearly kind of all dealing with right now is the reality of the staffing in this situation, right? So I think that if we use that as an example, we know that as camps, our flexibility in staffing will become more and more a reality. The context of when I started as a counselor, that you did 10 weeks in a row, had one day off every 7 days or 6 days, are no longer going to be some of the reality. As much as some of us are still probably thinking, yeah, we want that, it is not. Like, we know that it is hard to kind of get the staff with that kind of level of commitment. We know that when we're talking about more openness into the job market and so on. So I think if we use that as an example, we can't be stuck in our ways. We need to evolve. We need to change. We need to adapt. We need to be flexible. And I think as an organization, as a board, you need to sit down and kind of look at that. What are we doing? What can we prove on how we do things? And from a very macro business lens, right? Like we're not talking just about your program. We're talking about your finances, your registration, all of these things, your site and asset management, so that you're approaching it with a different perspective to make sure that it keeps up with the current needs. So, and I could probably duplicate a lot of what I just said to the individual as well, but I think flexibility will certainly be key.
Yeah. I've used an expression on this show before that, no matter what your faith background is, when you're involved in camp management, change is God. Like, change will overrun. It's always going to happen. It is infinite, and it is a part of everything. And we have to, I think it's just a mindset thing. It's like, everything has changed. Joe used to say it all the time on here, that how much you have to be ready for change and intentional about that.
I think we've almost been lucky as a sector. I think change has not been forced upon us as much as other sector. You look at the large private, let's just look at tech. If you looked at tech as an example, private tech, if you didn't evolve, within a 6-month period of time, you could have developed an app that became obsolete. So you constantly had to be flexible and adapt. And that's why some of these interesting processes that have been created for organizational management came out of these tech sector, because of the evolution of change was so fast.
Yeah, how fast?
Right? Where some of us kind of in camping, we've been insulated and isolated in a quite positive way in some ways, but now we're certainly having to look at that. So I think it's good, man. You're absolutely right. Change is God, constant.
Yeah. And so I think that's an important part as a senior leader, a board member, or an owner, to have your staff practice being okay with change, considering change, researching potential change. I've given a presentation for the last 2 years on how artificial intelligence is going to impact the business part of camp for very positive ways, I think. But I think it could potentially have huge negative impacts on the people that we serve, the families that we serve, as work changes so much. So it's just a matter of getting okay with change and helping your people be intentional about that and thinking. One of the things that we both, I think, are quite passionate about is thinking, training, practicing, making camp better all the time, thinking from a Six Sigma or a lean perspective, that it is part of your camp culture, that everybody's responsible for making camp better every day. And the framework that I like the best is the idea of 2-second lean, where can I make camp 2 seconds better every day? So it's not like I'm going in, tearing down every procedure we ever had and starting all over. It's like, no, we're making small changes. We're trying them. And if everybody, from top to bottom, is empowered to make improvements every day, then you have a culture of change and looking for new ways. And I think it's just such a huge, that lean mentality of looking for waste, how to figure out how to remove it, and make change a part of your culture.
You're absolutely right. And I think as you were naming some of these things, I was writing a few things down at the same time, and then as you named them, I was crossing them off. But we're talking about change management and the culture of change, and we got to be cognizant of a few things. Like you said, 2 seconds lean, 2 minutes lean, in that essence of how do I make camp better? I think that's a really great, simple mentality to kind of approach that everybody can adapt to. The other thing that we have to be cognizant is, what does the change management or the culture of change, what does it look like at camp? Because sometimes you have strong innovators, strong people with great ideas, but they'll want to change everything right away.
Yeah.
And there's a change process that an organization does have to discuss and adapt. And every single time I talk with a new camp, we talk about putting something new into place, either a pretty significant change in their programming approach, so on. I usually talk about a 3-year perspective, because change can happen overnight, but the adaptation and the reality of change and the acceptance of change doesn't happen overnight necessarily. So if we're making big fundamental change to some of the programs, I talk to usually the leadership team, the board, about it can take up to 3 years. The first year is kind of like the first pilot. You're going to get a little bit of the kinks out of the way and figure out. The second year is where your culture and your community has started to adapt to it. Usually by the third year is where, like, we've always done it this way.
It's always been that way. Yep, 100%.
They done, but we have to be mindful of those things, and you also have to be mindful of how many of those types of change can you do in 1 year.
Yep.
Because I think sometimes it's or easier when you're getting to these like brainstorming sessions to get great ideas and all of a sudden throwing a lot of change, but you kind of got to pick your points, and then like your top points, and then like you said, some of the 2-minute changes or 2 minutes lean kind of mentality. It's pretty simpler to kind of adapt some of that, but it takes a bigger conversation on change management and change management culture that we probably don't spend enough time as maybe a board or as a leadership team about. How do we discuss those things? How are we conscious about change, and how are we intentional about the pathway to change? Right.
Yep. Well, and I would. The communications consultant part of me is there is so much change. We can go through a lot of change, and we have to constantly also be better at communicating it, communicating why we're making changes and all of that. And even with, a part of that communication plan has to be that camp is such an emotional home for so many people that as soon as you say the word change, it feels like a threat to their emotional home. And that's all part of the communication part of it too. Is like, we have to make some changes. We don't have to get rid of everything, but we have to look at everything and make sure it's right for the future. But then we have to figure out ways to communicate what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Agreed. And I think one of the things that we sometimes underappreciate in the community, like as a communication consultant, as you mentioned, sometimes that I feel is underappreciated or under discussed, is the communication change according to the population that you're reaching out, from your current families to your alumni to your staff. That message doesn't or shouldn't necessarily look the exact same way, because so I think there's that kind of piece that sometimes I've seen that we kind of do blanket communications statements around some of these changes, to kind of being more intentional, and maybe that's part of our second key word when we were discussing these things as getting ready for 2035 is intentionality on everything that we do, kind of considering the big picture. We know as camp directors and even as organization, it's easy to get caught into the weed when we have so many day-to-day tasks that we have to accomplish. But it's kind of remember that 2035 big picture and being intentional about it, of like, how is this serving to get me to that result, that goal, or that 2035 definition, to make sure that you kind of are, it's easier to stay on the path and kind of get lost throughout that kind of journey. Yeah.
There's two parts of that, the list that we made about the organization, the overarching organization, and those people, that I want to touch on. One, I don't think we have to spend any time on, because I think it's so obvious that we have to be prepared for climate change and all of the obvious effects and the non-obvious effects. I think a lot of North American camps now have an awareness of what it's like to run programs when smoke's so bad, because of what happened in 2023. But there's that's part of it. I don't know if there's any particular part of climate change stuff that you want to expand on. My other thing that I want to make sure we talk about is we expand who is comfortable at camp and who camp is for, so that the kids and the staff that work at camp in 2024 don't look like those in 2035 when we're sort of measuring this thing.
I think you're absolutely right in terms of the climate. I think climate change is one of the biggest thing that has occurred in the last few years has been the forest fire situations in multitude of provinces across Canada, which is, we've seen it over the course of maybe the last 10, 15 years,
Yep.
more on the West Coast. And
Of course.
the last 2023 was certainly spread across.
Yeah.
I think one of the interesting things that I've seen in a few specific camps that I've worked with for years is even certain things that we've never seen, like never seen tornado warnings. And in the last few years, I've gotten 5 or 6 tornado warnings in some of the local camps that I've worked with. So even really thinking about the robustness of our emergency procedures on some of these things.
Yes.
They haven't been there, but all of a sudden they are here. So we really need to consider some of those plans. And again, I know this, we don't want to talk about COVID as we're kind of dealing with that, but even the climate change and what does that have in terms of impact to communicable disease outbreaks and all these things that we're seeing more and more change in those types of things. So in the end of the day, I think, how are we adapting to climate change? What is that going to mean in terms of the full year-round programming over time? And I think the other part is considering, what does that mean for risk management policies and procedures? Have we updated those to make sure that we are ready for any of these certain types of scenarios?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's a huge part of that. So just thinking about organizational level, not the personal camp director to camp pro level, it's something we both feel really passionate about, is that we need to be intentional. I wish we could count the number of times the word intentional has come up in now 14 years of CampHacker podcasts, but intentional about going to communities, finding new communities that haven't had camp in their background or camp in their history. It's already been recorded, so I can give you a little preview. One of the shows that's coming at the end of the season is our 200th episode, and Chris and I are talking really specifically about what we would do if we were starting a camp next year. And that was a huge part of it. It's like, we're going to people, and we're going into new communities that camp hasn't reached before, and we're going to invest in trust in those families, invest in those communities, so that there's that. Any specifics of that you want to make sure, just give people the idea of how they can prepare their organization for that level of intention?
Yeah, I mean, as you kind of discuss how to reach out to communities, this has been I want to say, somewhat of a systemic issue for as long as I've been in camping. And I can use my own personal experience. I grew up in New Brunswick, where in a French community in New Brunswick, where overnight camping in my area was not even a concept. Like, it was just not advertised to us. Most of the camps that were around. And again, for those that are listening, we have about 9-10 accredited camps in New Brunswick, probably a few more that are non-accredited. But just to give you an idea, like, it's not something, depending on which community you grew up in, maybe not something you heard of. So like that whole context, I think, is interesting when you start thinking about, how do we reach out to communities, and how do we define the communities that we're reaching out? And kind of like you established there, the big key word there is trust. How can these communities that don't know us trust us with their kids, right? And how do we go in that? And I think one of the things that I would probably go back to the first kind of word that we talked about is flexibility. I think we've become very, I don't know if paralyzed is the right word, but we're
locked in.
We're too locked into our facilities, to be quite frank. And it's great. We want to utilize these facilities, but sometimes these facilities are not able to do year-round programming. There's our opportune time. So if there's a community that I have not reached out to from a geographical perspective, or however I'm defining the community that I'm trying to work with, then why am I not going to them? Why am I not offering something in their community by us so that they can see us? And one of the interesting things that I've seen over the course of my career, and I've been lucky to, is the installations of family camps in other settings, right? Like it's such and I think from the data that we'd seen, family camp was one of the fastest growing programs across the country. And where else could you start getting a community involved? Is it by inviting the entire family? It could be at another site. It could be at a hotel. It could be whatever kind of place you want, but it gives you flexibility to run something and give the culture of the meaning of your camp to these families, and they can kind of get buy-in. So when I was looking at those models and being able to adapt to the communities that you want to be, you want to see in your summer program, it's like, how do you do that? And I think some of those things, like a day program, a family camp programs, are really instrumental in how we build them, but going out, not always trying to get people to our physical facility. And I know it's counterproductive because we have massive assets and we want to utilize those a lot of time, but I think there's an opportunity for us to offer types of program that maybe our sites can't physically offer at this point in time, and others. It's also about the geographical distance. So how do we go in and make it more accessible? So that's kind of when you were talking about that piece of community and building trust, is how do we utilize our core programming strength and going out and trying to develop something in the community, and essentially by the community for the community kind of context.
Sure. Right? We spent a lot of time on that in CampHacker in the last couple of years, because I think things that have happened since 2020 have really reminded those of us who own remote properties that often our remote properties are in fairly conservative areas. Often rural white people are kind of the general look of the people that surround us, and that automatically makes it unsafe feeling, I think, really emotionally unsafe for people to come to our remote properties. And if we can get to them, then we can circumvent some of that stuff, and just prove the value of camp to families.
And I'm sure you've talked about this in the past. The whole context and definition of camp is also a very tricky one, right? Like you come in with certain ethnic backgrounds or communities that word itself is not a positive connotation. Yeah. So how do we educate? How do we change? And it's not necessarily a change of the perception of the word, but how do we change our own way of advertising these types of program? And there are other countries that talked about, and just you and I in the past, from that are huge in overnight camping, that the context is there, but we're just not reaching out. So they don't know to what degree those types of programs exist in Canada. And then there's others, like we said, that the whole word is a completely different thing. So how do we make sure? Because as Canada becomes more diverse, we need to become more diverse as a community camp.
Yeah, I agree. So we spent a lot of time, the two of us, talking about the future of what the organizations need to be thinking of. But we also talked about the individual skills. A person who wants to be a camp professional for the next 10 years or still in the next 10 years. We both think that there's sort of like camp maverick skills, those ones who are intentional about this, who can think beyond the day in front of them, and are thinking big picture. There's a lot of really interesting skills that we identified. But one of the things that I want to make sure we spend time on is being a camp director who measures things. And that was a really big point and a really interesting discussion that you and I had when we had that time together. How do you develop this kind of skills? If you are a person like me who got involved in camp because they were a program person, like I got involved. but you've heard me say on the podcast, people lots of times that I don't necessarily like kids all that much. I think they're fun. I love teenagers and young adults, and working with them is the passion reason why I do this job. Kids are a great bonus because of that. But how do we get how do we get those skills? If you're a program person, you're in this because you want to work with kids. How do you develop the skills to start to measure things and be more aware of more than just, I don't know, camper satisfaction surveys or whatever it is?
It's a great question, and I think it's funny as you're talking about that. I certainly love working with kids, but as in the data science part of me, I was like, oh yeah, I want numbers and I want to understand the data. But I think there's a few things. One, as you mentioned it, everybody's level of comfort in this will vary, but it's about starting. I think it's something that as camp directors, we constantly have to push ourselves into saying, I'm not comfortable with this, but owning it and owning that uncomfort and saying, we're just going to start. And we can start simple. I don't think data gathering has to be overly complex. It can get very complex if you want to, but that's a organizational and personal choice. But at a minimum, there are certain things that you should look at. And I think when we had talked about that, like, oh, what would be kind of as a starting camp director in a new camp, what would be
I want to get better at understanding metrics and numbers that's what I was hoping we could touch on right now.
And kind of the top three that I would start off, like you're a new camp director, this is a new organization, where would I start? I would start with the basic demographic of children. So like the age demographic for me is very important. Why? Because I get to see the scope in my program. So if my program is from 7 to 14, I get a better understanding on how many younger kids are coming in, how many kids are maybe aging out. So you kind of gave me an idea of the next few years of recruitment, of where my target numbers could be. Yeah. And I also like the return versus new ratio in that, right? So how many new versus returning campers are coming in. So it kind of, just with those two in my mind, gives you a good understanding of the community, right? Like how many are you recruiting, how many are new, and how many are within a certain age demographic and so on. So I think those were the two. And the only other one, and this is always a bit of a I don't want to say a scary word, but the word that intimidates folks about is when we start going into details of finances. And it's like, oh, what financial metrics and what are you kind of looking at? And one of the things that I always want to kind of figure out pretty quickly in running a camp program, and goes again with the intentionality, is how much does every single child that we take into camp, how much does it cost? Not how much do we charge them? How much is a true cost per camper? Because again, it's about knowing. So I know the intention behind it. So as an example, you don't need to be overly complex. Of course, there are methodologies say like fixed variable income and then figure out all that stuff. But at a basic, if you're not 100% sure, just use your total expenditure from the previous year divided by the number of campers, and it'll give you a ballpark figure. Yep. And at least from there, you can kind of see a few things and kind of ask yourself a few questions. It's about, okay, are my camp fees matching my direct camp expense? If not, that's fine. Because if you are a non-for-profit camp, you might be subsidizing, which is absolutely fine. But it gives you the ability to kind of look, what am I charging? What am I getting from donations? What am I getting from other sources, to just make sure that that picture of how much it costs per camper makes sense, right? Yeah. So those are usually the three ones that I want to kind of look at. The age demographic and the returning rate gives me an idea of the health of the population that is coming to camp, and then the financial one gives me a little bit of a general health of the financial picture for camp. One of the things that you kind of asked at point is like, how do we prepare ourselves, or how do we move forward and kind of data? One of the things that I've done a few sessions on this, and we have to reverse engineer the process. We often sit down and look at all the data that we're asking either in the registration forms or the camper survey, and then we say, okay, what kind of questions can I get answers? And it's the actually opposite of what we should be doing. We should be asking ourselves, what answers do I need to do my job better, or my camp better? Right. How do I improve this? And then you ask yourself, what is the question that we need to ask that? Maybe you're already asking that. Maybe you're not. But we often have been reactive or historically reactive because a lot of us have gone into a camp that already exists. We already asked all these questions and data.
Yeah.
And then we kind of say, how could we use this data? But it should be the opposite. Think about the questions that you want answers as a owner, as a director, and so on.
Yeah.
And then you position that question into those surveys, into your registration piece, so that at the end, then you're getting the information you need to be able to get a better get better data to make informed decisions. And it goes back to the intentionality, right? Like being intentional with data.
Yeah. I've written my own list of I think the last time we talked about, we thought about like a dashboard of the camp director. Like, what are the things that you would want a forward-thinking camp director to build that skill of understanding metrics and learning more and making decisions on that, creating some sort of dashboard, something you could see quickly or was up all summer in a spot in your office that you could make some changes on it. Definitely that expense per camper versus the income per camper, I think, is a great one. I think I'd also be really interested in doing regular, i.e. weekly, camper and staff satisfaction surveys. I would want to know even something as simple as the Net Promoter Score. Are campers, it's a little different for kids, but I would even ask staff one question on a scale of 1 to 10. How likely are you to recommend to a friend to work at our camp next summer? And that's a simple number because I can have them pick every week where that number is on the scale from 1 to 10. And that would give me, average that out. And I have if I have a 5.5, I'm going to make some changes that summer quickly. If I have an 8.7, then I'm like, okay, I think we're doing right. We won't make some small changes. We can ask how to do improvements, but that's one of the things that we seem to have down. And I would say a lot of camps really have a good handle, again, a level of intentionality with camper programming and staff care, but not all do. But once you have an idea on those things, then you can expand into camper lifetime value and all those kind of things that I don't think would be the first year. My first summer of being a metrics focused or a metrics learning camp director, I wouldn't get into too far into those things. But I would like to know every week how satisfied the kids are and how how the staff feels about the way camp is going for them.
I agree. If you were to look at how do we instill that culture, how do we build that in terms of that intentionality and make it part of a consistency? Consistency is going to be key here. And when you're kind of looking at that type of data, and if you're looking at the staff's recommendations on like, would they refer a friend or would they refer their younger sibling to come to camp, it kind of just give you kind of that essence of that question. And if you're looking at campers, I think there's like, if we're to look at fundamentally basic 3 different things: food, lodging / comfort in terms of your accommodations, and then programming. And I think one of the things I loved about what you said is, if I notice that this is off, I will make changes immediately. And I think that part we don't discuss about that, because I find how many camps, and this is also bandwidth and so many other things, but we review these surveys at the end of the year or the end of the summer. But if we are more proactive with it, we're able to change now. There's certain things I get. You're not going to be able to change everything in the immediacy. Yeah. But there are other things that are small changes that could impact that right away, which we want to make. Why would we waste an opportunity if we're in week 1 of the summer? I'm like, I'll change that next year. Well, we're just in week 1. You still have time to make those changes. And I think there's a thought process that needs to go through that can we make these changes now? What kind of immediate impact it will have on our staff, our culture, and our campers' experience, and make sure that we do that. I think the other thing that I would, this is a little bit of maybe more of a personal recommendation as I look at people as you started talking about numbers, is to utilize numbers in a way that you're able to discuss these in a very easy manner. What I mean by that is I sometimes find like large scales, and that's fine, I tend to want to go with maybe a 4-point scale. The 3 and 4s are
Gotcha.
positive,
Yep.
1 and 2 are negative.
Yep.
So at the end, it's easy for me to kind of use a percentage, meaning if 95% said 3 or 4, I'm saying 95% positive response,
Yeah.
1 or 2 negative response. Because if you get the fifth or the number that is neutral in there, you kind of get in an awkward position saying, well, half are neutral, half are so on and so forth. So position it in a way that you will be able to use those numbers in a positive mannerism. And I think when we're and this is maybe certainly applicable to non-for-profit and for-profit world, but when you look at the camper experiences, can we communicate that to partners, to shareholders, to donors about like 95% of our camper population wants to come back next year. They would recommend it in our family. They identify growth programs. So making sure that we are asking questions that helps us make our job, but also asking questions that help us show the impact and the importance of camp to our donors, our shareholders, our stakeholders, or whomever you're trying to bring into the larger conversation of camp.
Yeah. Stephane, I appreciate that. There's so many pieces of this that we haven't had a chance to talk about, but I think it's important to people who are watching us or listening that if we want camp to be here in 10 years, we have to get even more thoughtful and more intentional. And I think we can. I think camp can definitely get better all the time. And there's a lot of changes that can happen. But I appreciate you sharing your insights on how to be that kind of thoughtful, forward-thinking organization in camp. So I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, Travis, and always open to having those conversations with you.
Yeah, right on. So we're going to come back in and I have one other question we'll ask you for a recommendation for a tool of the week. But before we do that, I want to take just a second and thank UltraCamp for sponsoring this episode of CampHacker. If you're a CampHacker listener, you can discover the good communication tools that UltraCamp has put together in an exclusive space built just for CampHacker listeners. So if you go to ultracampmanagement.com/CampHacker, you can download their free marketing toolbox guide, and that has been updated for the summer, and will give you a way to look forward to 2025 as well as you're heading into the summer, some of the things that you'll need to be thinking of getting ready for next year. UltraCamp knows that as a camp professional, you got into this, as I said, you're a program person, most of you. It wasn't necessarily for the paperwork, but UltraCamp really wants to make it easier to understand all that stuff and to take some of the pain of that off of you. That's why they've created this all-in-one platform that allows you to streamline your program management, your camper management, etc. You can say goodbye to the hassle of learning and managing multiple platforms, making sure all that your tech stack all talks to each other, etc. But with UltraCamp, you can effortlessly register and manage your campers, generate and direct the communication that you're sending to your families, organize the schedules and activities of your staff and campers, and process your payments and donations. UltraCamp's goal is to make sure that their camp clients, the camp pros like you, spend less time in the office and get outside, get out of their office and do that thing they love, see the positive effects of camp. So if you want to know if UltraCamp is right for you, they offer free customized demo sessions. You can see their software in action and they can talk specifically to how it can address your needs. You can sign up and get that free download at ultracampmanagement.com/CampHacker. That means that we are ready for our tool of the week.
Tool of the week.
Stephane, I'm going to go to you first. We always ask our guests to come to the show prepared to talk about one tool that would make them, they recommend others to help them be a better camp director. What is the thing, what's your tool of the week this week?
Sure. I'm going to recommend a book or an audiobook. It's called The Five Dysfunction of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. I listened to it probably a little over a year ago. And again, we think about team. Not often we talk about the dysfunction of a team. We talk about the functionality of a team, obviously. So there's a little bit of a reverse engineering approach to it. But in camping and in our communities, we're so good at building that team, building that trust and building that peace, which for me was like, oh, this is something we're really good at.
Yeah.
But when I was listening to the book, what I really enjoyed is it went beyond that first two layers, which the first two layers is building community, getting to know you, and building trust.
Yeah.
But after that was, how does a team function on specific objectives? How there's their accountability? How is there certain things that I think we're good at the first layers? Maybe the second and third layer, we are still challenged. And it really kind of put a few things in perception for me, and it helped me build those expectations with my leadership or management team that I'm hoping trickles down to the rest of the team on the accountability, the discussion, and all those pieces. But no, really helped me design a few new approaches to staff training by using kind of that those concepts last year. So would highly recommend it.
That's perfect. I'll remind folks, if you want to find Stephane's tool of the week, my tool of the week, although mine isn't necessarily going to have a listing, but past tools of the week and other information from past shows, you can go to camphacker.tv/podcast, find the show notes there. My tool of the week, as I say, is physical things, but it's kind of the act involved in using those physical things. My tool is Post-it notes, Sharpie markers, and a big wall. Stephane and I had a great discussion in a couple of days, as I say, spent in Montreal in an apartment that we rented, where we just talked about the future of camp for 2 days. And it is my favorite way of thinking big, is getting to move around and writing on Post-it notes and putting them up on a wall in places and moving them around and organizing them. And I would highly recommend for good Camp Mavericks to give their staff some questions and some time to discuss and answer those questions, come up with creative solutions when they can move around, when they can put stuff up in different places and challenge each other on them and ask deeper questions about them. But just that, I think that physical act of moving and thinking and having those easy facilitation tools, so you can record it later for one, but also so that you can have that ongoing discussion while you're all in the room, is incredibbly effective. It is one of my favorite things to do ever, is just have the ability to think about the future of camp with smart camp people, and put all those ideas up on a wall is perfect. So I highly recommend that you invest in some Post-its and some Sharpies and some time and a wall.
Just a reminder, as Travis and I learned that way, some Post-its are not as equal as others, and they will fall. So invest into the better marked Post-its, or look if they have expiration dates.
That's so smart. Yes, give up on the dollar store Post-it notes package. They don't stick to the wall. You can go for the good 3M ones, or maybe even the good Staples ones, but don't use the cheap. Don't cheap out on Post-it notes, or you're just going to end up with like a rain shower of Post-its falling off your wall and feathering down to the floor at the end of that. So yeah, good reminder. Thank you for saying that. I wanted to thank you, Stephane. I really appreciate that. I'm so grateful that you are here. If folks have a follow-up question for you, how can they get in touch? Something based on something you said, or want to check in on what you do?
Sure, absolutely. Again, Travis, it was a pleasure, and people can get in touch with me over on our website, which is stephanerichard.ca, or simply by email, which is shrichard@stephanerichard.ca, or by reaching out directly, calling me at 506-878-0396, whatever way that they feel empowered to do so.
Great. Yeah, that's perfect. And again, camphacker.tv/podcast, where you can find the show notes and an easy way to get in touch with Stephane. I also think we've turned this on. It's a new experiment with our podcast hosting company, but I think that there's a way now, if you're listening to us on an app on your phone, there should be a link at the beginning of the notes where you could send a text message to us. And so we'll start to gather those over the summer. If you have feedback or questions, or want me to pass something on to Stephane, you should be able to, in the app on your phone, send a message to the CampHacker team there, and Chris or I or any of our guests can get back to you with some specifics. I'm going to take 1 second and say that you should check out our other show called The Pudding. Mandy and I have some great guests, and we're actually starting to record our second season now. We just finished our last episode of season 1 just came out, We're recording this in the middle of May 2024, but Maddie and I are about to start to record our second season. So search for The Pudding in any podcast apps or ask for it on your smart speakers. The Pudding, of course, is because that is where the proof is. And we're talking about the research around camp and all the interesting things that people are studying and the tools that they're giving camp pros to tell better stories about camp. Thanks for the evening, friends.
The CampHacker podcast is brought to you by Beth and Travis Allison, summer camp leadership training and marketing consultants. Thanks for listening.
Hey, Camp Pros. We love that our industry is built on sharing. In order to foster that spirit, if you've gotten even one good idea from a Go Camp Pro podcast, a masterclass, from the Summer Camp Pros group on Facebook, at a conference, or wherever else, we ask that you give credit where credit is due. That way, we can encourage camp pros to keep freely sharing their brilliant ideas and make the camp industry better. Thanks very much.
Hey, it's Travis. Camp directors often tell me they're just too tired to take on anything new. That's exactly why my free Resilient Camp Blueprint Diagnostic exists. It doesn't add work, it shows you progress. Quick, free, repeatable, you'll know if your systems are paying off without the guesswork. Try it today at camp.mba/Travis. That's camp.mba/Travis.